Hey guys, Prandall here, coming at you with another movie review. Today we are going to be discussing the Hulu original, Treehouse. I gotta say that this movie took me by surprise. It definitely wasn't what I was expecting. The trailer made it out to be this really dark and gory horror film with plenty of jump scares. But what we got was an uncomfortably in-your-face message about rape. I'll explain. So the movie starts with this Gordon Ramsay type guy named Peter, who runs a restaurant and has his own TV show. He's literally Ramsay, right down to yelling at his employees and being too busy for his own daughter. He promises to spend a whole weekend with her, but he can't this weekend because he'll be far too busy. Peter needs this weekend to avoid tabloids from the press that I will explain later. He decides to take a trip to his childhood home to spend time with his sister, who he hasn't seen in years. It's funny that he has time to hang out with his estranged sister, but can't find time to be with his only daughter. Along the way, Peter stops at a rundown bait shop and has a lively conversation with a man who's either mentally challenged or he's the unfortunate offspring of a brother and sister. While at the incest bait shop, Peter runs into a group of girls who are on their way to celebrate a bachelorette party. For some reason I honestly thought that they were coming back from a lesbian wedding. Anyway, Peter finally arrives at the house, which is quite large and fancy. He reunites with his sister Gwen and they have a warm greeting, but it doesn't take long before they start arguing about past resentments. After things get awkward, Gwen receives a phone call and has to leave. Peter finds out that his sister is the district attorney and she's called off to go do DA things, leaving Peter alone with his super creepy housekeeper Agnes, who is blind, but also not blind. I don't get it either. Peter tries to enjoy his time in the big house, but ends up hallucinating, or actually seeing some pretty fucked up shit. He spots a big black dick goat that disappears before anyone sees it, a disturbing painting of a woman with no eyes or black eyes, nasty bugs infesting the home, and he also finds someone tuck a really bloody shit in the toilet. This house is weird. Later that night, one of the girls from the gay bachelorette party comes by the house. Her name is Kara. She tells Peter that they are conveniently staying next door and their power went out. Interesting that Peter's house is just fine, but for plot reasons we will let that one slide. Kara asks Peter for some supplies, and they share a very awkward flirting session, including Peter comparing himself to Ted Bundy. Oddly enough, Kara didn't bring any of her friends with her for protection from some strange dude in a giant house by himself. Either way, Peter was friendly enough and offered to let her come inside while he gathered the things she needed, to which Kara accepted. Peter gives Kara what she needs, and then she leaves. Meanwhile, Peter creepily watches her from a window the entire time. The next morning Peter goes for a run, and the plot forces him to run into Kara again in front of a tree house he played in as a kid. Kara introduces him to her friends Mary and Elena. Peter invites the girls over for dinner so they can try some new recipes he came up with for his new cookbook. Kara accepts without asking the other girls for their opinions. By the way, the treehouse I mentioned will be important to the story later on. The girls arrive later that afternoon and Peter is introduced to Lilith, Mary's mother, who Peter wastes no time making an awkward race joke about their family resemblance, considering Lilith is white and Mary is black. Peter also meets an English feminist named Morgan. The group have a great time drinking and eating, and Peter even chimes in about fun topics like pregnancy, birth, and motherhood. Oops. Peter tries to impress the ladies, but fails and annoys most of them. He ends up getting shit-faced and wobbles off to bed, but not before offering to let the girls stay the night and even spoon with him if they'd like. What a charming guy. Peter wakes up the next morning to find Morgan passed out in bed with him. I guess she took him up on his offer to spoon. Considering they were both completely dressed, they probably didn't have wild drunken sex. Peter staggers into the bathroom to find a cockroach crawling across his mirror. He then hears creepy old music playing and a weird bird call, so he goes off to investigate. He wanders into Agnes's room and finds an old record player, a giant birdcage, and a random ass peacock. I knew Agnes was creepy, but damn, that's some kinky shit. Peter turns around to find a giant Blair Witch style doll made out of wood, and it's dripping with blood. He stumbles out of the room to find a creepy witch at his front door. I knew this was where shit was gonna get real after seeing that bitch in the trailer. The witch starts approaching him as another hooded figure runs by. Morgan can be heard calling Peter for help from his locked room, but Peter can't help because he's suddenly becoming paralyzed for some reason. Peter falls to the ground and gets dragged off by the hooded figure as the creepy witch stands over him. Peter later wakes up on a bed in his underwear with a chain collar around his neck. Peter also seems to have a confusing boner, or just an awkward bulge. He's still paralyzed and looks down to see Morgan laying at his feet wearing lingerie. Morgan wakes up seeming confused, but without giving the audience time to process the scene, she immediately reveals that it's just an act. Another creepy figure appears and turns out to be Kara. Did I mention that the girls have a fucking crossbow aimed at Peter's junk? Yeah. Anyway, Kara explains that she's actually the sister of a girl named Becca, who turns out to be a girl that Peter raped a few years ago. Even though Peter is chained to a bed with a crossbow ready to castrate him, he still has the balls to shame Becca right to Kara's face and claims that Becca was a coward for killing herself after what happened. He takes no responsibility for her death or even the rape and uses the excuse that they were just kids and Becca shouldn't have taken the easy way out. Becca actually slit her wrists with a knife from Peter's very own line of cutlery. Wow. The other girls from the bachelorette party walk in and surround Peter. They reveal that they are actually a coven of witches who even have cool powers like making balls of fire in their hands. Mary even turns a gold bracelet into a snake that wraps around Peter's wrist and turns back into gold. I'm not sure if any of it is real or we are supposed to be having some kind of acid trip alongside Peter. The witches prepare Peter for some kind of sacrifice or ritual by taking blood, hair, and nail clippings from him. All the while Peter screams about how he's innocent. Mary and her mother Lilith even act out an awkward reenactment of one of Peter's known assaults. After some more torture and humiliation, Peter's paralysis starts to wear off and he manages to overpower two of the girls and escapes. He runs downstairs and tries to call the police, but the line is busy. He then calls Lonnie, the weird guy from the bait shop, but the girls capture him again. Lonnie arrives shortly and Kara innocently greets him saying that everything is fine and Peter just invited them over for dinner. Surprisingly, Lonnie isn't as dumb as he appears and pulls a gun on Kara. He tells her that if she wanted him to believe they came over for dinner then they should have turned some lights on in the house. Lonnie is fucking awesome and officially my favorite character. Just when he's about to save the day, Agnes appears and she conveniently turns out to be Lonnie's mother. She convinces Lonnie to go back home and tells Kara to finish what they started. I knew Agnes would be part of this. It turns out that Agnes was raped by Peter's father and Lonnie was the result. I guess according to this fucked up movie, rape is genetic and runs in the family. Moving on. The sisterhood dresses up Peter like a woman and forces him to run off into the woods while they hunt him. Thanks to the plot, Peter just happens to run into his sister Gwen who just happens to be driving by after doing district attorney things. Peter tells Gwen everything that happened to him. Gwen responds by saying that she knew these girls were going to do something to him, but not take it this far. This was probably the only good plot twist in this whole story aside from Lonnie being a badass. Gwen tells Peter that she was tired of defending him after every issue he's committed, especially the one including Becca who just happened to be her best friend. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that while Peter was running away, he tried to hide in that old treehouse. This was where he raped Becca and the coven had decorated it with bloody newspaper clippings of his numerous assaults. Peter tries defending himself yet again, and while he and Gwen are arguing, Kara appears and magically blows up the car windows as the other witches drag both of them out screaming. We get a few brief flashes of Peter being nailed to a table crucifixion style as the witches chant over him. The table is lined with a bloody pentagram and a snake slithers down Peter's throat. Suddenly Peter wakes up in his bed the next morning wearing the same clothes from dinner. He basically has a Ebenezer Scrooge moment, wondering if it was all a nightmare. Just when things seem fine for the rapist, the phone rings and it's Kara calling to warn him to be a good boy, or they will return and finish what they started. I'm just sitting here with multiple questions. Did they perform a ritual? Is Peter cursed? Was any of it real? What the actual fuck? All of a sudden the stove catches on fire to prove the witch's power and to scare Peter again. Peter flees in fear and ends up going to his ex-wife's house. She's clearly not happy to see him, considering he arrived half an hour before her wedding. Dick. Peter explains that he desperately needs to see his daughter. He tells his daughter that he's genuinely sorry for never having time for her and taking her for granted. He promises to spend as much time as he possibly can with her. After he leaves, he bumps into a female caterer who seems to know him by name. He asks if he knows her, and she explains that he does now. She shows him a tattoo that all the other witches had, to show Peter that they will be keeping an eye on him. The movie then cuts to another crappy plot twist. We get a flashback to before Peter arrived at the house to meet Gwen. She's in the kitchen when the stove bursts into flames like before, scaring her as Kara walks in with a remote control. The two girls have a big laugh, and then it's revealed how all the magic happened. Peter's paralysis was caused by a drug that Agnes put in his food. This drug also caused hallucinations, which would explain the really creepy shit. The windows were blown out by charges that these girls somehow knew how to build and handle. Basically there was no magic and the girls weren't really witches. Then the movie ends. Honestly, I would have much rathered a fucked up movie about real witches attacking a guy just because they're evil witches. Instead I have to feel bad for being part of the male species and watch a movie with topical subtext about rape culture. This wasn't necessarily a bad movie by any means, it just wasn't what I was expecting, and the whole thing made me uncomfortable. I kind of wish I had been born a woman now. I do kind of like the idea of the secret sisterhood watching out for each other, like women should watch out for each other in real life. All in all, this wasn't the horror movie I wanted, and it made me hate men. Thanks Lou.